The envelope was sitting on my chair, not handed to me, not placed in front of me with a smile, just left there. A small ivory envelope with my name written in my stepmother's handwriting, propped against the back of a folding chair at the very end of the table, near the door to the kitchen. I stood there for a moment, holding it, listening to the sounds of 80 people laughing and clinking glasses 30 feet away from me. My father's wedding reception had been going for 40 minutes, and I had just found my seat assignment. I want to say I was surprised. I want to say that the moment I saw that chair, that folding chair, the kind you rent by the dozen, not the white cushioned chairs everyone else was sitting in, I felt something sharp and sudden. But honestly, I had been waiting for something like this. I just didn't know it would be this obvious. My name is Adelaide. I'm 31 years old. I'm a paralegal at a mid-size firm in Columbus, Ohio, and I am very, very good at reading documents carefully. That detail matters. Remember it. My father remarried 14 months ago, officially, on paper with a ceremony and a photographer and a 5-tier cake. His wife's name is Renee. She has a daughter from her first marriage, a 24-year-old named Portia, who works in marketing and has the specific kind of confidence that comes from never being told no by anyone who mattered. I had met Renee exactly 9 times before that wedding day. I had met Portia 11, I counted. My mother passed away when I was 19. It was quick. A diagnosis in March, a funeral in July. My father grieved for about 3 years, and then he started dating, and then one day he called me and said he'd met someone special, and I told him I was happy for him because I genuinely wanted to be. I wanted to be the kind of daughter who made things easy. I had spent a lot of my life trying to be that. Here's what I had not spent my life doing: demanding a seat at the table. Literally. So when I found that folding chair, I did what I always do first. I took a breath, I smoothed my dress, I sat down, and I opened the envelope. Inside was a printed card, the kind you can make on any home computer, off-white cardstock, slightly crooked cut. It had my name at the top. Underneath, in a smaller font, it said, Auxiliary Guest. Overflow Seating. Auxiliary Guest. Overflow Seating. Auxiliary Guest. I sat with that word for a long moment. Auxiliary. Not daughter. Not family. Not even just Adelaide. Auxiliary guest. I looked up. Portia was at the head table in a champagne bridesmaid dress, laughing at something my father had said. My father was in his suit, the gray one I'd helped him pick out at the mall 6 weeks earlier, when he'd called me panicking because he didn't know what to wear to his own wedding. I had driven 40 minutes each way on a Tuesday evening to help him choose that suit. He looked good in it. He was smiling at Portia like she was the funniest person he'd ever met. I took out my phone and took a photo of the card. I don't know exactly why I did that in the moment. Call it instinct. Call it 12 years of watching legal teams build cases one document at a time. I took the photo, put the card back in the envelope, and slid it into my clutch. Then I went and found a glass of water and started paying attention. The thing about being placed at the wrong table is that nobody notices you. And when nobody notices you, you can watch everything. I watched Renee work the room. She had a specific route. She'd start at one end, exchange a few words, touch an arm, laugh, move on. She never stopped anywhere for more than 90 seconds. It was efficient. Practiced. She reminded me of someone running a client event, not a wedding. I watched Portia. She was more interesting to watch. She'd cycle back to my father every 15 minutes or so, lean in close, say something in his ear. My father would nod. Sometimes he'd glance at his phone. Once, he signed something. I couldn't see what, just that he held a pen briefly and a piece of paper passed from Portia's hand to Renee's bag. I noted the time. 6:47 p.m. My cousin Marcus, my cousin. Okay, I won't use the names from the list. My cousin, who I'll call by what I always called him growing up, which was just cuz, came and found me around 7. He's the one person in my family who has always been exactly what he appears to be. Steady, direct, and absolutely terrible at lying. He looked at my chair. He looked at the table I was sitting at, which held 2 other people I didn't recognize and had not been introduced to. "What is this?" he said. Overflow seating. He stared at me. Auxiliary guest, I added. Adelaide. He said my name like it was a full sentence. I know. You drove here from Columbus. I know. You helped him pick that suit. I know. I handed him a bread roll from the basket in the center of the table. It was the only thing on the table. No butter, no salad, nothing else. Just a basket of dinner rolls already going slightly stiff at the edges. He took the roll, looked at it, and put it down. I'm going to go say something to your dad. Please don't. I touched his arm. Not tonight, it's his wedding day. I don't want to make it about me. My cousin looked at me for a long moment. He's known me since I was 7. He knows what I look like when I've already made a decision and I'm just waiting for the right moment. Okay, he said, but I'm sitting with you. He pulled up a chair. That's when the server came around. For the table where my father and Renee and Portia were sitting, there were individual plated dinners, salmon and roasted vegetables, from what I could see. For the main guest tables, there was a buffet setup starting in about 15 minutes. For our table, in the overflow corner near the kitchen door, the server set down a small bread basket, a second one, since we'd already eaten most of the first, and a bowl of simple green salad with no dressing. My cousin looked at the salad. Adelaide, he said. I see it. This is not. I see it. I took a piece of bread. It was the dense, slightly dry kind. The kind you get when a caterer is stretching the budget on certain tables. It wasn't inedible. It was just very, very clear about what it was. I ate it. I kept watching. I am paralegal. I read contracts. I read them the way most people read text messages, quickly, fluently, with an instinct for what's been left out. And what I had been quietly doing for the past 3 weeks was reading everything I could find about the business my father co-owned with his college friend, a mid-size HVAC distribution company that had been profitable for about 8 years. I hadn't started reading because I was suspicious. I had started because my father called me in a panic 6 weeks before the wedding and asked me to help him understand something his accountant had sent over. He said Renee had suggested he consolidate some of the business assets into a joint holding structure for tax purposes. He said it seemed complicated and he just wanted someone to look it over. I am a paralegal. This is what I do. I looked it over. What I found was not a simple tax structure. What I found, buried in 3 attachments and a supplementary amendment, was a clause that would transfer 40% of my father's voting shares in the company to a newly formed LLC, an LLC in which he was listed as a minority stakeholder and in which Renee and Portia were listed as managing members. I read it twice. Then I sent it to an attorney I work with, a woman named, well, she knows who she is, and I asked her to look at it too. She called me back in 2 hours. This is a pretty significant transfer of control, she said. Does your father understand what he's signing? That's what I'm trying to figure out, I said. I did not tell my father what I'd found. Not yet. Not before I understood the full picture. Over the next 3 weeks, I kept reading. Renee had given my father various documents in stages, some framed as insurance updates, some as estate planning. Taken individually, each one seemed routine. Taken together, they formed a clear direction. Renee and Portia were systematically positioning themselves to control the most valuable asset my father owned, the business his college friend had trusted him with. The business that had paid for the house I grew up in, the business that would, if my father retired in the next 5 years as he'd told me he planned to, be the primary source of his income. I had all of this on my laptop. I had the original documents. I had the attorney's analysis. I had a timeline. And I had been waiting, not because I didn't know what to do, but because I was trying to do it right. What I had not expected was the folding chair. What I had not expected was the bread roll. What I had not expected was to sit in the overflow corner of my father's wedding reception, eating stale bread while Portia laughed at my father's jokes in a champagne dress, and feel, with complete clarity, that waiting was over. My cousin leaned over around 7:30 and said, "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," I said, "that if I were going to show my dad something important, this room full of people might actually be an advantage, not a problem." He was quiet. "She could say I faked it," I said. "She could say the documents were altered. She could pull him aside later and spend a week undoing whatever I showed him in private. But here, I looked around the room. Here there are witnesses. Here there are people who know my father, people who knew my mother, people who have known him for 20, 30 years. You brought the documents? My cousin said. I patted my clutch. I had printed everything, the full packet, in order, the way an attorney would present it, and I also had the files on my phone, backed up on cloud storage, with the attorney's email thread as a timestamp. I came here tonight to be a good daughter, I said. I really did. I was going to give them today and call my dad this week, and talk to him quietly about what I found. I looked at the breadbasket. But I think the thing about tonight is that they made a choice tonight. They made it pretty clearly. My cousin didn't say anything for a moment. What do you need from me? He asked. Just be here, I said. Just be somewhere I can see you. The toast started at 8 p.m. Portia went first. She stood up with a wireless mic and gave a 5-minute speech about how her mother deserved happiness, how grateful she was for this new family, how much she'd grown to love my father. She said the word family 6 times. I counted. She did not mention me once. Not one reference to the fact that my father had a daughter who existed, who was in this room, who was sitting in an auxiliary chair eating bread. My father's college friend went next. He's known my dad for 30 years. He talked about what a good man my father was, what a hard worker, how proud he was to be his partner in business and his friend in life. He got a little emotional. The room was warm and soft with it. Then, Renee's sister went. Then, one of my father's cousins. I watched my father's face during all of this. He was moved. He was genuinely happy. I know my father's face well enough to know when he's performing happiness and when he's actually feeling it. He was feeling it. He believed he was surrounded by people who loved him. That's what made it hard. That's the part I don't think people understand. When they hear a story like this, it would have been easier if he'd been a bad father. It would have been easier if I'd had a reason to want to hurt him. But he's not a bad man. He's a man who loved my mother and then lost her, and then was very, very lonely. And Renee had found him in that loneliness, and moved in carefully and thoroughly, the way water moves into a foundation. So gradually you don't notice the damage until the wall starts to crack. I stood up while his cousin was still sitting down. I walked to the front of the room. The wedding coordinator saw me and started to move toward me. The program was finished. There were no more scheduled speakers. I made eye contact with her and said, quietly but clearly, I'm his daughter. I just want 1 minute. She hesitated. I held eye contact. She stepped back. I picked up the mic. The room was still chattering. I waited. 30 seconds. The noise faded. Hi, I said. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Adelaide. I'm Edward's daughter. There was a soft murmur. Some people smiled. My father looked up from the head table with surprise. Warm surprise, I thought, like he hadn't expected me to speak. Dad, I said. I love you. I want you to know that first, before anything else. I love you, and I drove here today because you're my father and this is your wedding day and I wanted to be here. He nodded. His eyes were bright. I also drove here, I said, because I've been trying to figure out the right moment to show you something. Something I found when you asked me to look over those documents 6 weeks ago. The room temperature shifted. I felt it before I saw it. A change in the quality of the silence. Renee's chin lifted just slightly. I didn't want to ruin your day, I said. That's really true. I thought about waiting until this week. I thought about calling you privately, the two of us, sitting down somewhere. But I realized tonight. I paused. That private conversations have a way of getting managed. And I think this is important enough that the people in this room, the people who love you and who have known you for decades, should be here when I tell you what I found. My father's expression had changed. He was watching me carefully now. I opened my phone. When you asked me to look at the asset consolidation documents Renee gave you, I looked at them the way I look at anything. Carefully. And what I found is that buried in those documents, in a supplementary amendment on the 3rd attachment, is a clause that would transfer 40% of your voting shares in the company to a new LLC. an LLC where you are listed as a minority stakeholder. I looked up from my phone, and where Renee and Portia are listed as managing members. The room was quiet now. Completely quiet. I had an attorney review it, I said. I have her analysis. I have her analysis. I have the original documents with the clause highlighted. I have the full paper trail, time-stamped. And I have to tell you, I am not standing up here because I want to embarrass anyone. I'm standing up here because you are my father, and in 5 years when you want to retire, this company is what you've been planning to live on. And someone has been very carefully, very quietly, trying to take control of it. I looked at Renee. She was very still. Portia had gone pale. My father's college friend, his business partner, was sitting completely upright, both hands flat on the table. I have printed copies of everything, I said. For you, for your partner, and I've already sent copies to your attorney's office. They'll be waiting in his inbox on Monday. I set my phone down and looked at my dad. I'm sorry to do this today. I really am. But I was not willing to let another week go by. I put the mic down. I walked back to my table. My cousin was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I sat down next to him. I picked up a piece of bread. I ate it. The room stayed quiet for a very long time. I'm not going to tell you it was clean after that. It wasn't. My father stood up and left the room about 4 minutes after I sat down. His partner followed him. There was a 15-minute period where Renee and Portia were at the head table, not speaking to each other or anyone else, and the wedding coordinator was standing near the door looking like she had never experienced anything like this in her professional life, which she probably hadn't. 2 of my father's longtime friends came and sat with me, not to say anything really, just to sit. Renee tried to leave at some point. I saw her moving toward the door with her phone pressed to her ear. My father's partner intercepted her. I don't know what was said. What I know is that she sat back down. My father came back into the room after about 20 minutes. He looked older than he had when I arrived. He sat down at the head table. He didn't look at Renee. He looked at me. He nodded. Just once. A slow, deliberate nod. I nodded back. Here's what happened in the weeks after, as briefly as I can tell it. My father's attorney reviewed all the documents. He confirmed what my attorney had found. The transfer documents were never finalized. My father had been stalling on the final signature, which was the only reason the share transfer hadn't already gone through. The wedding, I later learned, had been the deadline Renee had set in her own planning. She'd expected to have those signatures within 2 weeks of the ceremony, while my father was still in the warmth of the honeymoon and less likely to scrutinize anything closely. My father separated from Renee within the month. I won't say more than that because it's his story to tell about his own marriage, and he's told me, quietly, that he's still processing what it means to have trusted someone that completely and been wrong. I don't push him. I just show up. I drive the 40 minutes when he calls. We've had dinner 6 times in 2 months, which is more than we had in the entire year before the wedding. He never fully explained to me why I was put at the overflow table that night. My guess is that Renee coordinated the seating and wanted me somewhere I wouldn't be noticed, somewhere on the margin of the event, where I'd be least likely to make trouble. She had not counted on the fact that the margin is exactly where I do my best work. It's where I watch. It's where I pay attention. It's where you notice things when you're not busy performing. People have asked me since. Friends, my cousin, a few people who knew my parents, whether I regret doing it the way I did. Whether a room full of 80 people was the right audience, whether it was too much. I think about the comment someone said to me after, a woman who'd been a friend of my mother's for 20 years, who pulled me aside as people were leaving and held my hand and said, "You did what needed doing." The audience wasn't the point, the witnesses were. And I think that's the right way to put it. Not drama. Witnesses. Because I know what happens when you handle things quietly, in private, with only 2 people in the room. I know what happens when there are no witnesses and one person can spend a week reshaping the story. I had watched it happen to my father for 14 months. Small moments of management, small revisions of what he thought he knew, until he was sitting at his own wedding reception believing completely in something that wasn't real. I didn't stand up at that reception to humiliate anyone. I stood up because I was the only person in that room who had read the documents, and someone needed to say what they said. I am my mother's daughter. She taught me to be quiet and careful, and to wait for the right moment. She also taught me that the right moment sometimes arrives in a chair by the kitchen door with a basket of dry bread and your own name written wrong on an envelope. You sit in that chair. You eat the bread. You wait until you have the room. And then you speak. I've thought a lot about what it actually takes to do something like what I did. To stand up in a room full of 80 people at your own father's wedding and say the thing nobody wanted said out loud. People hear that story and they think it took courage. And maybe it did. But what it actually took, more than anything, was patience. And patience is quieter than courage. It doesn't look like much from the outside. It just looks like a woman sitting in a folding chair eating bread. Here's what I know about Renee and Portia, now that some months have passed and I can look at the whole picture clearly. They weren't unusual. That's the hard part, what they did. The slow repositioning, the documents introduced gradually, the warmth layered over everything like a coat of paint. That's a pattern as old as loneliness itself. My father wasn't a foolish man, he was a grieving one. And grief has a way of opening doors that you'd normally keep locked, because when you're lonely enough, you stop asking who's knocking. I don't say that to excuse what happened. I say it because understanding why something happened is the only way you ever actually stop it from happening again. Renee read my father correctly. She knew what he needed to hear and she said it, and she kept saying it, and she was patient too, more patient than most people would have been. The difference is what we were each being patient for. I was being patient to protect him. She was being patient to take from him. That distinction is the whole story, really. What I learned, what I keep coming back to, is that paying attention is not passive. We're taught, a lot of us, that watching and waiting is the quiet thing, the soft thing, the thing you do when you don't have the strength to act. But I sat in that overflow corner and I watched everything. And that watching was the most active thing I did all night. It was the thing that made every other thing possible. My mother used to say that the truth doesn't need your help. It just needs you to not stand in front of it. I think about that a lot now. I didn't manufacture anything. I didn't set a trap. I read documents that my father himself had handed me. I found what was in them, and I refused to let the version of events that Renee was constructing be the only version anyone heard. That's all. I just refused to let the story get managed without a witness. And maybe that's the thing. Maybe that's what it comes down to. In situations like this one, someone has to be willing to be the witness. Someone has to be willing to sit in the uncomfortable chair, eat the stale bread, feel the full weight of being sidelined, and still pay attention. Still take the photo of the card. Still keep the documents. Still wait for the room. Because the people who do harm like this, quiet, incremental, plausible harm, they count on nobody being willing to do that. They count on the person they've pushed to the margins feeling too humiliated, too uncertain, too afraid of causing a scene to speak up. They count on you being so focused on being palatable that you forget you have something true to say. I am not interested in being palatable anymore. I am interested in being accurate. Those two things are not always compatible, but only one of them actually helps anyone. My father called me 3 weeks after the wedding. We talked for 2 hours. He cried once, briefly, and then pulled himself together the way he always does. At the end of the call he said, "I should have seen it." And I said, "You were grieving, Dad. You weren't looking for it." And then I said, "I was. I'm sorry it took me as long as it did." That's the part that stays with me. Not the room going quiet. Not the look on Portia's face. The part that stays with me is that I almost waited 1 more week. I almost drove home that night having said nothing, telling myself I'd call him Monday, that I'd find a gentler moment, that I'd protect him from the embarrassment of a public conversation. And if I'd chosen comfort over accuracy, 1 more time, that final signature would have gone through by Wednesday. You sit in the chair, you eat the bread, you stay awake. And then you speak.